Hello, and welcome to the BDO Talking Trusts 2021 series. This is episode 2 of our 4-part series, which aims to bring clarity to the purpose and application of trusts in wealth management. In this series, we host experts in tax structuring, trust law, and family business governance, who will share practical advice and guidance on how the trust and family can work together for a family legacy and long-term wealth creation. I'm Ricardo Teixeira, Chief Operating Officer at BDO Wealth Advisors, and I'll be your host for the Talking Trust series. Thank you for joining the conversation. Previously on Talking Trusts, we focused on helping you navigate your duties and responsibilities of being a trustee. This year, we extend the conversation and aim to bring clarity to the opportunities and solutions on how to get the trust working for you and your family's long-term wealth creation. Today's webinar will be recorded and added to our website and BDO YouTube channel, together with all previous episodes in the series. We have set aside time for an interactive Q&A session following the talk. So if you have any questions or areas that you would like discussed further, please line them up by using the Q&A function. You'll find this at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Just look for the speech boxes with a question mark. BDO has been providing professional audit, advisory and tax services to families and businesses for over 60 years in South Africa. And to be candid, we've seen a lot of trustees and families struggle with optimizing the family trust for wealth creation. Trusts are, however, wonderful vehicles. By having the right solutions and processes in place, a trust can be extremely beneficial to a family's wealth creation and protection. A trust is a unique structure, though, and certainly more complicated than managing a company. There are many nuances to maintaining the validity of a trust. And as a result, any shortcoming in managing the trust, no matter how insignificant it may appear at face value, may have a devastating consequence on the original purpose and intent in establishing the trust. Our objective in hosting the Talking Trust series is to bring clarity, awareness, and knowledge to the best practices and opportunities for effective governance and administration of a trust. Marrying family governance with the trust deed. Today's conversation explores the relationship between the family and the trust deed. Managing family wealth in a trust can get complicated if there's no clear structure governing the family's vision and values for the family wealth. Family trust is inextricably linked to the founder's vision for the trust. Our guest speakers today will discuss the importance of first defining the family governance structures before you go about structuring the trust deed. Very few families get this right. We see a lot of families struggle with the consequences of not starting the financial planning process with the family conversation, but simply diving straight into the trust deed. The trustees need to be aligned with the family's vision and values. Trevor Dickinson is well experienced to talk about family governance. He has 30-year working career in a fourth-generation, 110-year-old family business, which was founded by his great-grandfather in 1910. He has first-hand experience into the critical issues and challenges associated with working in, as well as leading, a family-owned business. He completed an undergraduate degree in BSc Building Management. He holds an MBA, as well as numerous executive education certificate programs. Trevor is also CEO of a consulting practice specializing in family business advisory called Family Legacies. He has been awarded a certificate in family business governance and directorship from Family Business Australia. He holds membership with the Institute of Directors of South Africa, Family Firm Institute in the United States of America, as well as the Family Business Institute of Advisors in Australia. So needless to say, he has vast experience working with family-owned companies throughout the world. Please welcome Trevor Dickinson.
Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be meeting with you or presenting this very interesting topic. The content of what will be covering, although a lot of it is going to relate to family business governance, the audience, as Ricardo described to me, encompasses people, high net worth families as well. So I'd like you to look at the content of what I'll be presenting to you in that context, and you can look at it rather interchangeably. although it's very much looking at the importance of good family governance for managing family wealth. This first slide, I'd like to just start off with a quote. It was actually a very interesting book that I read recently, which the title of the book, Borrowed from Your Grandchildren, resonated particularly well with me, and it gives the perspective in having the privilege of managing wealth. We are actually stewards of that wealth for future generations. And this particular book is by an American author, Dr. Dennis Jaffe, who's written quite a range of very interesting books on family businesses. And the one quote is, "Wealth alone does not ensure success." Now, I know that we're going to be discussing trusts, and that obviously is the management of wealth. So I think if we read this in that context, you'll see where I'm leading to. It stems from how families view the wealth and uses the wealth to develop the family enterprise. Generative families not only build a strong business or financial enterprise, but also a strong, vibrant and connected family that uses its wealth in many ways to have positive impacts on the family, its business and its community. So with the rest of the content that I'll be following has the same theme. Generative families, it's maybe a term that many of you may not be familiar with, is regarded as multi-generational businesses that have been able to be passed on from one generation to another. And this particular book describes the attributes of family businesses that have been in existence for more than 100 years. Next slide, please. Okay, what this particular slide is about family governance. I think many people are possibly familiar with corporate governance and have heard the word corporate governance. The one attribute of family governance, and based on my experience in my own family business and having worked with consulting to family businesses, is the major, I'd almost say the foundation of ensuring the successful perpetuation of a family business and family wealth revolves around having a good family business governance structure in place. The aspects of family governance is really a process and structure to educate and facilitate communication between family members involved inside and outside of the business. So that is really, if you can understand that, is in the context of being able to describe, particularly those individuals that are actively involved in the business may have a far deeper insight as to what's taking place with the business or the investments, etc. Whereas those that are not active do need and will benefit greatly by having open communication. The other aspect about governance is the building of relationships between family members, shareholders, owners, managers, and staff, and to ensure that that there's to allay any competing agendas that may take place. And then the additional aspect about it, it's a forum of constructive discussion, problem solving, decision making in the family, and vice versa. The next slide, please. This is an interesting slide that from the content of the family business governance course that I completed in Australia. And what it depicts is, in a family business, there are three overlapping systems. You have the business, which is possibly maybe not non-family members or family members actively involved in the management of the business. And then overlapping with that would be the ownership structure, which would be the shareholders. In some instances, those people could be actively involved in the business, or inactive, could be shareholders in the business but don't have an active participation. And then you also have the third element is family members. In the same context, there could either be overlapping, some of those family members could be actively involved in the business, or could also be shareholders actively involved in the business. The three elements that relate to family governance, this is a schematic that just describes it I think in a fairly succinct fashion. I'd like to just start from the bottom, moving upwards. The bottom section is the monthly board meetings. It's the management meetings that take place And it's for those people that are actively participating and knowing the intricacies of what's happening in the business. The next element is the ownership structure, where there'll be shareholders meetings, where you see at the bottom section, annual shareholders meetings. And then the incorporation of a family constitution. I think this particular forum is not, I'm not going to go into a significant amount of detail about the preparation of each of these respective documents, but it's just to provide you with a high level understanding of the different aspects that are beneficial to having good governance. And then the third element is a family council. And the family council is where there would be, in effect, a family council could be described as a family board of directors. And some people may think it sounds very too formal. In essence, what this structure entails is to have a group of family members that have open communication amongst the family members, that are able to give direction to the board of directors. They're able to give some perspective of what the desires of the family are and what they would like to see the strategy of the business being aligned with the family. And the family council is also, if well managed, is structured in such a way that it ensures the conversations that often happen in family businesses, and for those that are actively involved in a family business, probably find that when they're attending a family braai, sitting around the Christmas table or the dining room table on the weekend, in many instances start wanting to talk about business issues interchangeably with other personal family matters. And this is where conflict does arise, and people don't put the right context and the right structures in place to be able to have the correct conversations in the right forums. So this structure just depicts what is the correct approach to be adopted. Next slide, please. The one aspect of family governance, and it's again, Dr. Jaffe also had a very interesting article where he depicts four key attributes which are practices to enhance and ensure effective intergenerational family governance of wealth. And that's, I think, when the whole theme about discussing the trust deed in itself is a document that Fia's far more of an expert in this particular field. And although I think the trust deed would take care of aspects which can be written down in a factual way, there's a lot of soft issues that also are pertinent in terms of the intergenerational family governance, and that is communication. So the first aspect about it is a really free-flowing and open communication between members of the family, in such a way that each family member has a say, and it's to create, it's almost a democracy where all members of the family have a voice. And again, the Fia will be able to comment, but I'm not too sure to what extent the trust deed is necessarily going to articulate every facet of the type of communications that are likely to take place in a family where there are continued changes taking place with new siblings or new children that are babies that are born, and any transition and changes that do take place in the family. The second attribute of good governance is an effective board of directors, and that really relates to more of the corporate governance of the organization. Then the third element is a set of pure and clear agreements with respect to family mission and constitution. I'll describe in a little bit more detail what I'm referring to. And then the fourth element is a process of education of the next generation heirs. The ability to perpetuate wealth across generations and to have a well-educated heirs to understand the importance and their adoption of good stewardship of that wealth is a very important element. I'm sure Ricardo, when managing or assisting clients with the wealth management, trustfully have families that encourage participation of the next generation is to be educated about different aspects of the wealth that they're going to have the privilege of managing in future as the future generation. Next slide, please. All right, with regards practice number 1, family connection through open communication and family counsel. This is where effective families understand their long-term success is based on the health of the relationships as well as the performance of the assets. And they really focus a lot on the investment of communication in the family. When having had the conversation with Ricardo about wealth management, I think the aspect of asset allocation and investment of assets into different equities and hedge funds, etc., in some instances are possibly easier aspects to discuss, as opposed to really what are the soft issues that relate to the communication between family members and what their intentions are. And that is why it's highly encouraged to have open communication. The second aspect is communication is about information. It's about valuing and supporting human connection of family members, knowing and caring about each other deeply. This particular section, for those individuals that are beneficiaries of a trust, it's vitally important that the settler of the trust does communicate openly with the beneficiaries to understand what the asset class and what assets they are going to inherit. Next slide, please. All right, practice number 2 relates to the appointment of an empowered board of directors. The appointment of a board of directors, I know in many businesses, the fluidity of decision-making and family businesses function on the dynamic of being able to discuss matters in a very fluid fashion and prefer not to have a rigorous and structured approach. However, with good governance in a family-owned business that is managing wealth, whether it be the active family members on the board of directors or non-family members being appointed to the board of directors, those directors are there to be able to provide strategic direction to the business, and the family council give direction to the board of directors of what is expected of them. They're able to then ensure accountability, that the board of directors are accountable to the shareholders and stakeholders. And also the other really important aspect is the development of leadership. I mean, I can speak from first-hand experience. When I was joined our family business, my mentor, in fact, wasn't my father. It was actually, my father was already transitioned into the chairman position, and a non-family CEO was my mentor. And in the leadership development that took place was very much a structured approach to enable me to teach me the elements of what was going to be required to be able to be a good leader and to understand the responsibility that I had in terms of my fiduciary duties. So that is a very important element where a board of directors can assist and is very instrumental in guiding family members that may possibly be joining a family business. Next slide, please. All right, this is a really interesting section, and it relates to having clear purpose and clear agreements in a family mission and constitution. In many instances, I think that businesses are far more au fait with having a vision statement for their business and having a a set of values for their business and saying, well, this is the values that the business articulates, and the values that the organization will aspire to ensure that it resonates throughout the organization. This particular practice is where the family determines what their values are, and at the same time, those values are then utilized as a direction for the business to also have as guidance. There would also be a section pertaining to ownership, what gives person legibility to receive shareholding in the business, whether it be only family members of the bloodline, whether in-laws are entitled to receive ownership. And those type of documents enable the family to be able to have a structure whereby it creates clarity, so that it avoids situations where there's misunderstandings that take place. Then the other aspect relates to the responsibility of family members. This is the obligation of the owners in terms of their decision making, their confidentiality of sharing information, and how they would act in the community. Then the next element would relate to personal development. This is where it relates to the previous topic of the development of a successor in a not only the future success of a family business, but a developmental career for family members. The next element relates to marriage and divorce. I was actually preparing an interesting article this morning relating to the importance of preparing a good antenuptial agreements for the business owners and for a future spouse, and where an owner of a business would articulate to their son or daughter that are going to be getting married the importance of structuring a correct agreement and a premarital agreement. And those are the type of documents that would be incorporated in this section. The last element relates to recreational assets. I mean, there are many wealthy families that own holiday homes, and the type of information that could be incorporated would be who would be responsible for the upkeep of the holiday home. If anybody wants to make use of the holiday home, is there a small cost attributable to utilizing the home? And it's really there to be able to put down just some documentation that enables the family to be fairly clear as to how those assets would be managed. Next slide, please. Still on the practice number 3, there's an additional section which relates to the financial and investment aspects. I think this is probably an area where a lot of aspect would be talking about the asset management and whether the trust deed would specifically include that. I think there would be a lot more information that would be able to be included in the constitution as to, for example, what would be the propensity for risk. You know, whether the family would ensure that they would not embark on investing in a particular sector which may not be in alignment with their values. And then in this particular section would be guidelines of returns, the type of social responsibility. A family may indicate that they really would like to allocate a certain portion of their investments towards philanthropy, and that this is where this section on the Constitution would incorporate that. The next aspect would be shareholders' agreements, and a shareholders' agreement you could have. It's where the ownership transitions from one owner to another. You would incorporate buy and sell agreements. What would be the basis of when a buy and sell agreement? What would be the valuation of the shares? And that would be stipulated in the shareholders' agreement. And then the last one would be conflicts of interest. You know, there are many wealthy families and family businesses where the siblings are very entrepreneurial and may have come across investment opportunities. And in this document, you could incorporate the importance of affording the other family members the first right of refusal for the opportunity to be involved with a new investment opportunity. And that is to just allay any areas for potential conflict and to ensure that no potential conflict would take place. And then the last element is this family employment and compensation. And with this document, you would incorporate the criteria for on what grounds would somebody be able to join the business, and the criteria for them in terms of their experience and compensation. All right, now the last aspect is the practice relating to leadership development and the financial responsibility of the next generation. This is a very important aspect, and I think, when chatting to Ricardo and Fia in preparation for the conference, we were saying it's quite a number of people are not inclined to want to necessarily share information, particularly in terms of wealth that beneficiaries stand to inherit. And in this particular section of the good practice is the importance of sharing learning activities. And then the second one is the financial literacy seminar, where it could just be the education of possibly encouraging children to attend joint meetings when there's a wealth management conversation that could be taking place with BDO, and encouraging those beneficiaries to participate at those conversations. And then the last one would be just a leadership development program for the development of the next generation heirs. I know we're now 30 minutes into the seminar. I think Ricardo's. I think we're going to be now handing over to Fia. Fia is going to be going into more detail in the last part of the seminar about the trust deed. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you very much, Trevor, for sharing your insights and best practices for family governance. What I take away from your talk is that family governance is built on ongoing conversations. It's not a single exercise or document, and it's actually these conversations that really connect the family's vision with financial planning and ultimately the trust deed. And the trust is simply the vehicle that gives effect to the family structure. And it's the trustee that governs the trust.
Yeah.
So our next speaker is well qualified to talk about trusts and establishing the right trust deed for your family. She's a chartered accountant with a master's degree in local and international tax. She's also a registered fiduciary practitioner of South Africa, a master tax practitioner of South Africa, as well as a trust and estate practitioner. Besides being so well qualified, she's truly passionate about educating and guiding all role players in the trust industry in South Africa. We'll often read her opinion in the personal finance section of the weekend newspapers, and she has also published a book, Demystifying Trusts in South Africa. Please welcome Fia van der Spy.
Thanks for the opportunity, Ricardo. Unfortunately, Ricardo only allowed me 15 minutes for today, so I'm going to really go through some topics really quickly. The whole purpose is to just give a little bit of context after what Trevor said, to kind of bridge, between this session and what we want to discuss really in detail, the third session. So just a couple of things to think about, and maybe you can identify some of the aspects relating to your family that you can think about in the next 2 weeks. So by the time we actually get to the nitty-gritty, it would actually make much more sense in terms of how practically we're going to apply this. And I also think it's very important, however, Trevor has spoken about having a constitution and have, I call it almost a Rolls Royce. I think, we can start really at a mini level and work towards something where we have a very large business with a large value, where we need proper written up constitution documents. So often people speak to me and say, you know what, I'll start a trust one day when I've accumulated wealth. And I say, well, that's too late. because with where taxes are in South Africa, it is really almost impossible without incurring huge tax consequences to move wealth into a structure after you've accumulated it. So I always say, start your trust when you know you're going to be rich one day. So I think these principles that we discuss apply to both in your smaller instance as well as your wealth grows in the family, to actually start formalizing these kind of concepts. So when you read what the founding father of Dubai said when he was asked about the future of Dubai, he said, "My grandfather rode a camel, my father rode a camel, I drive a Mercedes, my son drives a Land Rover, his son will drive a Land Rover, but his son will ride a camel." Why on earth is he saying that? And I think that is so important when you actually look at generational wealth. What is the purpose of accumulating wealth? So when we look at the next slide, we will see that, unfortunately, when we transfer intergenerational wealth, that gets broken down unless we have an educated next generation to actually take care of this wealth. So some interesting statistics. Over the last 20 years, this is a US study, but people are saying that would be similarly relevant for kind of the rest of the world. So the silent generation, we're talking about people in mid-70s to 90s, they controlled about 50% of the wealth 20 years ago, and that moved down to 14%, understandable. The baby boomers are the stars. They, in their late 50s to mid-70s, they're still controlling 50% of all the wealth. And when you read in the media, they say they control up to 70% of the current disposable income. So they're the stars. When you look at Generation X, the early 40s to the mid-50s, they steadily increased the control of the wealth from 8% to about 28% in the last 20 years. The millennials, sorry for being very harsh, you the culprits, controlling only 7% of the wealth. And to put that into perspective, when the baby boomers were that age, they already controlled 21% of the wealth. So this is the generation that's probably going to inherit most of the wealth in the very near future. They're the largest, most educated, highest earning population, but the poorest. So why does that happen? We need to understand, how people differ, especially when we look at planning, trust deeds, charters, who's controlling the future wealth. Millennials, 35% still live with their parents. Only about 11% are labeled as relatively high level financial literacy, and 28%, almost a third of them, have got no clue. So apart from that, it's a debt-fueled consumer that we're speaking about. Lots of job hopping, so building personal wealth is not something they understand. They also are not very interested in investing in the stock markets when you look worldwide. So the study done in the US, in the next 2 generations, they expect about 30 trillion US dollars, that's 450 trillion US dollars, to move hands to the newer generations. Now, if we look at the mix here, and what you're seeing on the slide is we've got different personalities, we've got different people with different things that are important to them. And a lot of people say, just imagine a family gathering and how you hold up your breath. Think about, when we actually have to sit around a boardroom table, what that kind of dynamics would bring. So, yes, later generations, bring more shareholders, it brings in more personalities. So a very interesting mix when we actually look at family charters that Trevor spoke about, and when we look at how we put together structures, including your trust deed. So the next slide will show us some scary statistics, where Alan alluded to the usefulness of a trust. It's still the best vehicle to actually protect your assets, to serve as a shield to an extent for estate duty, to provide liquidity, and to provide continuity, which I think is the important conversation we are having here. So we are also busy, and I always say, what is the purpose of building all this wealth? And so, by the way, the baby boomers are of the view that 19% of them are not planning to let their children inherit anything. So I think it's very important when you spend 76,800 hours building your wealth, and very few people actually think about what should happen to their wealth when they are no longer around, because I think that's one certainty. We are at some point no longer going to be able to be in control of our wealth. So either spend the money and plan for that, or if you want to leave a legacy for your family, then you need to get your structures in order and understand the personalities involved. If you don't do that, for example, all the wealth growth happens in your estate. We can look at estate duty and death taxes in excess of 30%. When we look at the bankruptcies, if we don't structure our affairs, because remember, estate planning is disposing of your estate during your lifetime as well as upon your death. So it's not in a micro sense where I just have to worry about my will. So as long as I got a will, my things are sorted. We can actually take care of our assets during our lifetime. So yeah, if you don't, death taxes, death costs 30%, 220 bankruptcies per month. So all of us venturing into our own businesses, you may actually lose your entire wealth if something goes wrong. More than 70% of South African population don't have wills. So, for young families with minor children, that money goes to the Guardians Fund. So very little left to actually leave a legacy for your children. 90% of trusts don't exist. I've spoken about that last year in our series because of bad drafting. And if you have a valid trust, about 11% are compliant. So when you look at trusts in South Africa, probably 2 to 5% existing compliant trusts. Right, so just quickly, what we see on a daily basis, especially founders passing away, siblings left absolutely in each other's hair, is to actually understand the family and things that impact the trust, which people just don't think about often. People get a vanilla trust deed, and then after that they try and sort out their estates or do their planning or build on their charters that Trevor spoke about. So a couple of things that we have to consider is things like family life. The penny dropped a couple of years ago when I listened to a presentation by a lady who's 8th generation German family manufacturing buttons. And she said how stressful it was, to always around the dinner table speak about companies, work, the same family to be around a boardroom table and how stressful it was. And at the age, I think she was 21 or 23, she had to be on the board of directors, and how stressful that was for her. We have to think about cultures, especially South Africans. Children should be seen, not be heard. So we don't involve them. We don't want children to know about the wealth, just in case, they rely on becoming trust fund babies. First generational wealth, normally it's one person who built the wealth. He's normally the patriarch who controls everything, or she, so by the way, who controls everything. And to understand that later generations, the later the generation, the more owners and the more complex and, the more conflict we have between the owners. The alter ego trust we spoke about last year, very typical of that kind of first generational wealth builder who wants to control everything. They treat the assets as if it's theirs. So a big problem there. In families, we have to identify natural leaders. When we look, for example, at trustees and follow-up trustees, it's not necessarily the elder son that's going to be your natural leader who's going to run your business. Like Trevor was saying, he got taught by a non-family member. So we have to look at natural leaders in the family. Personality types. Some people are just not interested in running business. They kind of want to venture, off doing their own thing. People are immigrating. It's got a massive impact on the structure of the trust as well as how decisions are made. People have got their own aspirations. Should the trustee make provision for supporting people starting up their own business and actually grow the generational wealth together? People have got agendas, conflicts of interest, which Trevor also alluded to, divorce cases, how that impacts the trust, in terms of the trust deed and on its execution, the participation of everybody. We need to empower people, and we can only empower people if they are educated and they're involved. We need to look at skills development. Does the trust deed allow skills development to take place? Education, to what extent is the trust geared, and its purpose is to actually educate people as part of its purpose. We have to look at mentoring long before, the trustee needs to be appointed as a follow-up trustee. He or she needs to understand, what's required. So the involvement, like Trevor said, involve them in meetings and discussions for them to actually know, what's coming their way. And by the time they are becoming trustees, they are well equipped to do that. Issues around equal division, a lot of the trustees, a lot of will say upon my death, trust either comes to an end, or in terms of my will, we split the wealth in equal portions to the children. Although that is probably fair, it may impact on the economies of scale, where you could probably for later generations have built a much greater wealth. To actually provide responsibilities and accountabilities to people, which is important for them to actually be part of the family, be part of the business. Recreational assets, where does that fit in? That's part of the estate, that's part of life, it's part of the family, it's part of enjoyment, so that must be taken care of. Social responsibilities creeping up everywhere. So in terms of your trust deed, you make provision for certain donations to certain institutions, and maybe get the younger generation to participate on those kind of less impactful decisions, to actually start introducing them to the wealth management. Something sticking out as head is family offices, very much so, where you get a team of specialists who actually help managing wealth. Because it's becoming so complex, it's really important to maybe at some point consider a family office to help you manage the family's wealth. We look at the next slide. Some reality checks. Trust lasts 2 to 3 generations. It's becoming complex. Too many managers, too many owners. You need to plan for that. Each family is unique. It can be prevented, or at least postponed. As we say, we can get that economies of scale the longer we postpone the division of the assets. We need to tailor the trust deed. Once we tailor the trust deed to actually suit your family, and not just accept a vanilla trust deed, we can revise the trust deed on a very regular basis. And in the trust deed, we need to create mechanisms, such as creating sub-trusts at some point where the family just cannot work together anymore. So just quickly, in terms of structuring and how that will impact the trust deed on the next slide, is where's your family? Do you only have South African structures? Very little complication. When you have international families, and you have your some of your trusts in South Africa with international families, then you already have to start thinking about certain tax consequences. Where the families in South Africa and we have all our structures internationally, it's also got certain tax consequences. So very important when people start immigrating that we actually go back to the trust deed and see what it allowed. When we actually look at the family constitution, are people available to kind of have discussions, having them involved in business, etc. So something we'll discuss next week is the fundamentals of a trust. We have to have a separation of ownership and control from enjoyment, and that is something that, especially with current trusts, where we've got that patriarch controlling all the assets, we have to, in future generations, and as soon as possible, reach a point where we can create that separation, because without that separation, that you actually would pick up issues with the trust, and then you may undo your entire estate planning objectives. On the next slide, just to kind of alert you to a lot of issues that we'll discuss next week. Important to understand the trust deed is your constitutive charter. So that is where you would actually dictate to trustees what they can do, what they can't do, and you would have to have this dovetail with your constitution that you're going to have for the family. Once you get to that kind of formality level, your will would have to dovetail with this. So very important that the trust deed is actually determining what you can do and can't do. So very important to, when you look at the kind of generational wealth, is what is the purpose of the trust, and trustees have to live by that purpose. The powers for the trustees: are we going to allow certain family members to start their own businesses? You have to have that power in the trust deed. Are we allowing education? That the trust has to provide for that. So very important in terms of the powers that the trustees have in terms of the trust deed. Representation: who's trustees, who's directors, who's beneficiaries? All of them have different roles. If you're not a trustee, you cannot decide for a trust. If you're not a beneficiary, you can't benefit from a trust. So very important to look at kind of those interrelationships between those role players that we'll expand on. Things like follow-up trees, conflict of interest that we have to deal with in the trust deed, as well as when we're actually looking at who we're going to appoint as our follow-up trustees and what is allowed in the trust deed. Absolute transparency. A lot of people, like I said earlier, think the children shouldn't know anything until the day they die. I've got news for you. The Doyle case say beneficiaries have a right to see information, every single document down to voucher level. When we look at compensation, we have to consider that in the trust deed. Contingent beneficiaries is a whole section that we'll discuss on that. We may have to amend the trust deed to actually, cater for our changing family circumstances, changing laws, and then we may get to an unfortunate point where we have to terminate the trust, and we need to make sure the trust deed allows for that. So those are all things that we will discuss next week. So once we've discussed all of that and you have thought about your own circumstances, it is actually not that difficult to leave a legacy of love. So that is when you want to leave money for future generations and you're not the 19% of the baby boomers who are just going to blow all their money. So I think once you understand your own family circumstances, you provide a structure to it, you educate the people involved, and you involve all the family members to a certain degree, and very importantly, you communicate to everybody. I think you're actually not going to leave that legacy of love unless all of that is in place and we get the participation of all the family members.
Thank you, Fia. I think family dynamics and relationships do get complicated. I like your advice, I think both from Fia and Trevor, that we can leave a legacy of love if we simply engage in the important conversations about the family. And family governance and trust comes first before you've accumulated the wealth. So true. Thank you, Fia and Trevor, for your insights and shared wisdom. I think there's a lot to consider when we talk about marrying family with the trust. So let's continue the conversation with our audience's questions and comments. I'm going to start off with a comment and question from Irena Strassner. Trevor, if you can answer this, please. One of the biggest challenges is when family nominated directors vote in a family interest way, which may not correspond with the director's fiduciary duty of voting purely in the interests of the company. Trevor, how would you suggest that this be managed?
Cardiff, I'd just like to repeat the question. From what I'm understanding is that there would be a vote by a family director that's appointed to the board that is not acting in the best interests of all the family members. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I think that's the issue that's being positioned here. So it's the conflict between looking after the family, because you are the nominated director to represent the family, as opposed to what's best for the business and the fiduciary duty of voting for the best interest of the company.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And, earlier on when I was describing the family governance, there's one aspect of where part of family businesses is the importance of strategic planning. Mm. And the strategic planning, it won't necessarily be the full answer to being able to resolve that type of problem, but is where a family conducts a strategic planning process which determines what is the appropriate strategy for the business. And right. the two dovetail, but the business's strategy should be driven by the family's strategy. So that there's a very much of an interconnectedness between the two. But when there is a disconnect, I mean, there can be, for example, an individual that's active in a business may, for example, want to retain income and not do a dividend distribution because it's in their interests, because they would want to grow the business. And there may be other members of the family that would say, well, it's our objective to do a dividend distribution. Those type of aspects would be allayed if there's a good strategic planning process taking place beforehand, and also a good family council. So a family council would be able to give direction to the board of directors, to ensuring that there is an alignment of what the board of directors are doing that are in line with the family's strategy.
Thank you, Trevor. And I think that does answer the question. Like we use the example of the dividend. So having a family council and having that sort of agreement up front, the voting of the directors would be in sync with what's best for the family. So Thank you.
Ricardo, there's also a very interesting court case, which I think is also very important to look at next week, is where the trustees basically said they could do in the company as directors as they wish, because the beneficiaries can only concern themselves as to what is happening in the trust, and the trust only holds the shares. So I think that's a very interesting and a very relevant kind of a conversation here, because not only do you have a fiduciary duty as a trustee, but you also have a legal obligation in terms of the Companies Act, and those obligations are actually quite harsh. So I would do the comparison next week in terms of, you know, the difference between a director of a company and a trustee, and if you are both, what it means. So people can't get away with, you know, moving stuff down into companies and think, you know, the beneficiaries can only concern themselves what's happening at the top. It actually goes right down.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Fia. And I think that is exactly, I think it would be great to unpack that in our session 2 weeks from now. Moving forward, Trevor, would you mind, I think, just elaborating on, in the event of disagreement or conflict between family members, how does one best mediate that? I mean, your experience, do you find that, and perhaps Fia could also come in here after Trevor's started the conversation, is, do you find that a clause in the trust deed nominating an independent mediator could assist? Or just what are your practical experiences? Start with you, Trevor.
Ricardo, the nature of conflict is so, particular to the circumstance. There can be conflict between a father and a son, or between two siblings, that maybe both of them are actively involved in a business, and one family member, one of the siblings would want a larger allocation of capital to their business venture. I think it's all very much on a circumstantial basis. I don't know whether Fia agrees that it would be able to be incorporated in the trust deed. A well-functioning family council and conversation with the input from a mediator is definitely beneficial. And in fact, conflict is healthy. I think in any disagreement, there's nothing wrong with a disagreement between different parties, but the importance is to be able to ensure that it's dealt with in a mature fashion, and to not just sweep things under the carpet. I mean, I've also experienced where there is tension, or there is aspects that need to be discussed. It's better to bring them out in the open and have that conversation, because eventually that conflict could get to a very messy situation, and can have a very adverse impact on the family relationships and the destruction of wealth in the process.
Absolutely. Fia, your practical perspective on that?
Yeah, as I always say, your trust deed is your manual in terms of what you can and what you can't do. Trustees are decision makers, so without outside of that, nobody can force them to make a decision. It's not that easy to get rid of trustees. So again, you need to go to your trust deed if there's a constantly difficult trustee or destructive trustee, and then that's why it's so important to have a dispute resolution clause in your trust deed. So that you don't have to run to court, every time, you can't make a decision. And that revolves all around, do you need unanimity? Does a majority of trustees, can they make a decision? All the views around that is quite interesting. And in the event that trustees can't agree, because remember, the starting point is all trustees have to agree on all decisions. That is the common law position. So to the extent that a trust deed allows the majority to agree, and there's still not a majority, you would actually revert to the dispute resolution clause in your trust deed if it has one. And mediation is a very good starting point, because especially with families, it's mostly just emotions involved. So just sit around the table, discuss, rather than go the legal route and spend fortunes. So often it is just to deflate the emotions, and then a mediation clause may be very, very useful in a trust deed, especially with a family trust.
Right. Thank you, Fia. Thank you, Trevor. And I think there can be a lot more conversation around this, but that is exactly why we'll be hosting a continuation of this topic in 2 weeks from now. So thank you for joining today's conversation. This webinar has been recorded, and a link to the recording will be made available on the BDO Wealth website and BDO YouTube channel. And as I said, we look forward to our next edition of Talking Trusts, which will be hosted on the 22nd of June at 11 a.m. And we will continue the conversation of marrying family governance with the trust deed. In this part 2 of this discussion, Fia Finispe will focus on the trust deed and the considerations that actually need to be taken into account in keeping the trust deed relevant in this ever-changing family dynamics that we all experience in families. So until then, if you have any questions relating to the administration of trusts, please do reach out to BDO Wealth Advisors, and we'll be glad to help you get to the right solutions. So stay well, stay safe, till we connect again. Goodbye.